Well, welcome to another Black History Conversation session. I'm delighted we've got some really lovely guests with us here, guests from Jamaica and our speaker from Jamaica, also guests from the UK, and I'm Liz Millman from Learning Links International, and at the moment I'm actually based in Australia, so it's the middle of the night, so forgive me if I get my words mixed up at times, but I'll do my best. Okay, so we're just going to start off with our PowerPoint so you can see what's going on and what's coming up. So we have with us the Reverend Dr. Devon Dick, who we're absolutely delighted that you're with us, and also Dr. Vivian Crawford, who's also in Jamaica. And we'll be hearing more about the church and enslavement in Jamaica. And I did a little bit of research and found the illustrations, at least, of your book. I haven't managed to read it yet. And then a little bit later on, we're just going to talk about a very exciting development, and that is that Rosemary Caldicott's book about Captain Phillips is going to be published next month. So we're going to do a little bit of an update about that. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about Watangi Day in New Zealand. Okay. So next of all, then, I'd very much like to invite Reverend Dr. Devon Dick to start this session with a prayer, which is a tradition and approach in Jamaica. Devon, can you unmute yourself, please? Whoops. Sometimes you get hiccups. Devon, it's usually at the bottom of the screen, right on the, as you're looking at it on the left-hand side on my screen. You just click on mute and there we are, right, that's perfect. Okay, Devon.
Let us pray.
Thank you.
Almighty God, we acknowledge you as Creator. We thank you for having made us in your image with dignity, with creativity. We confess, oh God, that we have not always lived up to your high standards. And we ask you to enable us to recognize that all have been wonderfully and fearfully made in your image, to do your will, to serve your people, and to preserve your environment and world. We acknowledge that we are all equal in your sight, having worth, and you have given us purpose and meaning in this life. Pray now, Lord, that you will guide the deliberations and discussions and the decisions from this session. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us wherever we are. God is. Amen.
Thank you very much indeed, Devon. We don't usually ask our guest speaker to to do the prayer, but we thought it was appropriate today. Okay, so just for those of you who aren't in Jamaica at the moment, I just thought we'd have a few glimpses of Jamaica. Yesterday we were talking because we had a meeting with the Penance Project, and so we've got an illustration there of Devon House. I didn't mean to make the pun with your name, but yes, that is Devon House, isn't it? And Kingston there with all its glorious big buildings. I'm not sure if that's a pretty old photograph because the Hilton Hotel's still looking a bit smart there. And then we were talking about the Denby show yesterday, and also our links with penance. So I've added that in. Now, this is my bit where, because I'm in Australia, it's customary here to always acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where you're living. So I'm doing that now, and that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I've included the Indigenous map of Australia just to give an indication. Australia is as big as the whole of Europe if its outline of the map is superimposed on Europe. It's a massive continent, and in the continent there are many, many different communities of Aboriginal people, the first Australians, and there's a whole big story behind that. And I'm just going to say that I acknowledge that there are still people around today who do not understand the implications of the actions taken by our European ancestors. And I pledge to endeavour to help create better and more honest understanding of the injustices of the actions that European invaders as perpetrators of abuse to so many over such an extended time. And I pledge to make the effort to understand this shared history that destabilised so many peoples and nations around the world during the centuries of colonisation. Still go on. Okay, so that was an acknowledgement that I wrote a while ago, and it was actually for the session that Rosemary Caldicott did about Captain Phillips, because that's certainly something that makes you feel responsible. Perhaps we can talk about that again. But I always include this slide as well, and particularly because we've got the International Decade for People of African Descent logo poster there, and I'll explain why. So as Black History Conversations, we acknowledge the injustice of the actions taken by the British and other European countries that invaded and took possession of the islands in the Caribbean Sea, as well as the continents of North and South America. And if you've joined these sessions before, you'll have heard me read these out before, but I will state it again. So in addition, we also recognise the exploitation of the great continents of Africa, Asia and Australia, and many other parts of the world in the centuries of colonialisation and ongoing exploitation. And we acknowledge that this has resulted in the destruction and destabilisation of so many nations, peoples and cultures. We have Jackie Pennant just joined us, and Jackie was the person who inspired us to make a statement of acknowledgement for Black History Conversations, and I thank you again so much, Jackie. Right, next week we've got Professor Sherko Gill joining us, and she is going to talk to us about the UNESCO Slave Root Project's Collective Healing Initiative. So that'll be really interesting because it's her work is part of the International Decade for People of African Descent activities. So we're pleased about that. Now, just quickly to say that a couple of weeks ago, Maxine Berg joined us, last week, in fact, and she's a co-author with Pat Hudson of a book called Slavery, Capitalism and the Industrial Revolution. It was very interesting. Pat Hudson had joined us a couple of weeks before that to tell us about the book, but Maxine joined us to tell us about Eric Williams. And this is just to alert people to the fact, as Robert Moore was telling us earlier, Professor Robert Moore, that Capitalism and Slavery is now published and available in the UK in a new format with new forwards. I think there's 2 versions of it. Okay, then on the 26th of January, Laura Turallian joined us. Laura is the co-founder of Heirs of Slavery, and she has done some excellent work to acknowledge her family links with plantation owners and slave who had enslaved people on their plantations, and she's done some very good work, not only with apology but also with some serious financial reparations. But she's also working on another project now, which is about helping with archiving materials. So right, and just to say, when Pat came to talk to us, that was fantastic. So we're now well past our 125th session. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to ask you, Vivian, if you'd like to introduce our speaker for today, the Reverend Dr. Devon Dick, who we're delighted to welcome to Black History Conversations.
Oh, thank you, Liz. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege, pleasure, and duty for me to introduce Reverend Dr. Devon Dick. Any introduction about Reverend Dr. Devon Dick will last about 3 weeks. So I acknowledge thanks to Wikipedia that in 1 minute I have to say what I have to say. Reverend Dr. Devon Dick is a minister of the Baptist denomination of the Christian Church, but he embraces all people of God. And his publication, Religion to Riot, is a sought after reference about Jamaica. He is an outstanding scholar who brings his Christian witness to each discourse. A former chairman of the Jamaica Baptist Union, 330 churches, and membership of 40,000 communicants. He was a former chairman of the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, a member of council of the Institute of Jamaica that was established, as you know, in 1879 for the encouragement of literature, science, and art, etc., etc., etc. He's extremely modest in bearing, and although it is not show business, Liz, in a sense, this is our show business because it is the moment we have been waiting for. So I ask us to put our hands together as we welcome Reverend Dr. Devon Dick.
Thank you so much. Over to you then, Devon, if I can say that.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, good day to all. It's a joy to make this presentation, The Church and Enslavement in Jamaica, in your Black History Conversations. We're very delighted that Dr. Vivian Crawford could give such an eloquent introduction. And because of that, I know your expectations are high. But those who know Vivian Crawford knows that he exaggerates. So please take everything with a pinch of salt. If you'd allow me to make 2 personal references, Audrey there, who is online, is an Anglican, and she's a church warden in the Anglican Church. And we're happy to have her and all others online. My only grandchild was born in July last year in England. So I also have a connection to England, not to mention that that's where I did my PhD, the University of Warwick. And out of that came the book, The Cross and the Machete. The Church and Enslavement in Jamaica. I was told by Vivian Crawford not to go over 15 minutes. So I will obey. The key words, naturally, church, enslavement, Jamaica. So let me define them. The church can be understood in 4 different ways. The universal church, to which all Christians belong, or a particular local church, Boulevard Baptist Church, where I'm pastor, or any assembly of Christians meeting for worship. 1 Corinthians 11:18. Or as a denomination, wherein a group of churches with similar beliefs come together in a structured union for the proclamation of the gospel, worship of God, and service to God's people. And for this presentation, church will be understood as a denomination, such as Roman Catholic, Anglican, Baptist, or Moravian. Enslavement. The enslavement in the West Indies was different from many other places. The enslaved in the West Indies had no political rights, no civil rights, and no human rights. The enslaved were perceived as property that could be sold, willed, traded, used to pay debts, or disposed of. There was no provision for education for the enslaved by the state, and they were considered uncivilized. They could not vote, could not own land, could not marry, and could not testify in a court. They were said to have no soul, hence they should not become objects of the Christian faith. The enslaved in the West Indies were perceived differently in the Bible, in Greek society, and Africa. St. Paul himself in the Bible called the enslaved Onesimus a brother. However, the enslaved in Jamaica was seen as chattel and non-human property. And what was the attitude of the church to enslavement? It depended on which denomination and their understanding of God and interpretation of the Bible. Some say there should be a separation between church and state. Hence, the church should not be concerned with enslavement. Church and state have two different agendas, and like oil and water, they should not mix. Hence, when in 1814 the BMS missionaries, the Baptist Missionary Society missionaries, were sent to Jamaica, they were instructed not to get involved in political and social affairs. Then there was another view that the relationship should be one in which the church should evangelize, just deal with the souls of the enslaved and ignore the harsh and inhumane conditions of slavery. The Moravians arrived in 1754 with the aim to deal with the souls of the enslaved. The third view is that the church should be involved with the people, nation building. The church should transform the nation, wanting God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven, part of the Lord's Prayer. This was the understanding of the enslaved Christians such as Sam Sharp. Jamaica. Jamaica is an island like England. Jamaica is surrounded by the Caribbean Sea. It is 100 miles west of French-speaking Haiti, former French colony. Jamaica is 90 miles south of Spanish-speaking Cuba, former Spanish colony, and 170 miles northwest of the British colony of Cayman, English-speaking. So Jamaica is surrounded by nations with a legacy left by the former enslavers. And you will notice that one of the legacy is language. You will know which country colonized where based on the language. The Roman Catholic Church, through, I think, about 4 priests, arrived with Christopher Columbus in 1494 but they ignored the religious needs of the Tainos. They catered to the needs of the Spanish settlers. In 1516, Las Casas, who fought for the rights of the Amerindians, Tainos, the indigenous people, proposed the importation of African labor. He believed that the Africans would be better suited for the harsh physical labor of the plantation. And that led to the slave trade and slavery in Jamaica. As some would say, the rest is history. So in 1655, the British invaded and captured Jamaica and expelled the Spaniards. William Penn and Robert Venables brought the Church of England, whose role was to be the chaplain to the needs of the colonizers. The first denomination to minister to the enslaved were the Moravians, who arrived in 1754 from England. But they did not make much inroads among the enslaved. The Baptists were the first to exercise a successful ministry to the enslaved through George Liele, who arrived in 1783. He was a Black man and formerly enslaved in the United States of America. George Liele, 1751 to 1830, has some significant firsts. Liele was the first Black enslaved person to be ordained to the Christian ministry within the USA Baptist Church. George Liele was the first Black man to start a Baptist church in the USA, the first African Baptist in Savannah, Georgia, and I once visited it, and 15 miles northwest of Savannah, Silver Bluff Baptist, South Carolina. He was the first Black person to start Baptist Witness in Jamaica, and the first person to build a dissenting chapel, the Windward Road Chapel, Kingston, Jamaica. The first missionary to have a successful ministry to the enslaved in Jamaica, and the first Baptist missionary, even before the more celebrated and well-known British Baptist missionary William Carey. Lie's Anabaptist covenant, which was based on the Bible, protested societal norms, and he therefore affirmed the right of the enslaved to marry, which the slave society did not recognize. The covenant also said that Sunday was the Lord's day, and therefore the Lord was master of all, and not the planters. Liele was an inclusive leader. He had a few white people in his congregation. He welcomed all races. He received money from British Baptist societies to erect buildings. And in the early 19th century, Liele was invited by John Rippon, leading British Baptist missionary, to help reach freed Africans in the UK. So Liele went and ministered in the UK. Liele had 24 elders in his congregation, and 12 were women, including his wife, Hannah. He had an egalitarian view of the male-female relationship, which was counter to the chauvinistic slave society. The emphasis of Liele on education so early in his ministry was unprecedented in the ministry of European missionaries. Liele was committed to literacy, and he was way ahead of his time in starting schools for the enslaved long before mass education or any missionary society started education. Lie's education was Bible-based, but also provided the enslaved with the capability to read other materials. They learned basic reading and calculating skills. However, Liele did not make any frontal attack on slavery. Perhaps Lyle made no frontal attack on slavery because when he was in the United States, he was a loyalist and supported Britain in the USA fight for independence, the War of Independence, 1775 to 1783. He believed that apparently believed that, yeah, he did believe that supporting the British Loyalist Army was his best choice, best chance for freedom. In fact, both the patriots, the Americans, and the loyalists, British, promised the enslaved that they would be granted freedom if they supported them. However, both sides condoned slavery and both sides tricked the enslaved. As to, you could say, like Malcolm X, that Lyle was took, hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, and run amok. The brother was duped, so forgive him. Therefore, it was not surprising that in Jamaica, a British colony, George Lyle, founder of the Baptist work here, black man and formerly enslaved, was a slave owner. He bequeathed his 6 enslaved persons to his family. And you can see reference to that in my book, The Cross and the Machete, page 99. However, chances are he would have treated the enslaved not as property and would have treated them better than how the settlers did. But we need to make the point still that Lyle engaged in subtle sabotage of slavery and a pragmatic restraint in dealing with the slaveholders, but there was no evidence of frontal attack on slavery. The first church person to make a frontal attack on slavery would be Sam Sharp, now national hero, who was way ahead of his time as a 27-year-old enslaved person. He wanted freedom for the enslaved, but he was against violence as a means to get it. While some of his leaders of the protest wanted to use military arms, weapons, because they rightly believed that the colonial authorities would not give them freedom without a fight, he was against using force and only agreed to that force in the case of self-defense. It was a concession. Sam Sharp was a young man who was an advocate of nonviolent protest long before the Indian Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, U.S. civil rights leader and Baptist pastor. His march to freedom took a different road from the Maroons, who used force as a means of attaining liberation. Furthermore, Sam Sharp was a master organizer to involve approximately 60,000 enslaved persons from 200 estates in a cause for freedom at a time of no mobile telephone. He engaged many persons to buy into his ideas. He was a leader extraordinaire. What he managed to achieve was an almost island-wide protest. Additionally, Sharp, though a deacon of the Thomas Burchell English Baptist Church, was independent enough and wise enough and confident enough to interpret the Bible differently, and he understood God differently from what he was taught. He would not compromise on freedom. He maintained that it was not one minister, not one missionary said a word about freedom, not one, sir. But him say, but me read it in my Bible. Not to mention that Sharp was prepared to be a martyr for the cause of freedom. One Methodist missionary, Henry Blebley, said of Sharp, and I quote, "It was not his purpose to wade through blood to freedom, although he was himself prepared to die rather than remain a slave." Sharp accomplished this feat when he was enslaved and considered to be property with no political rights, no economic rights, no civil rights, and no human rights. He who was considered a nobody challenged the status quo, challenged slavery, slave society, and was successful. He was a freedom fighter and a skilled interpreter of the Bible. Sharp was a believer in equality, a value in which not even the admirable organization, the Anti-Slavery Society, believed in. Sharp's position was, and I quote, that the whites had no more right to hold black people in slavery than black people had to make white people slaves. Sharp can be credited with, through the church, can be credited with engaging in a widespread protest in 1831 that was a catalyst to the Emancipation Act of 1833 that was passed in the British Parliament. That's the presentation on the church and enslavement in Jamaica.
Well, thank you so much. That was a brilliant summary of the link. Thank you very, very much indeed. I won't ask questions first. I'm just going to ask colleagues if there are any comments that they would like to make. Okay, and welcome. We've got Dennis Townsend joined us now. Thank you very much, Dennis. We're pleased to have you join us. We've also got Opal, Myrtle, and Samsung SM, whatever. I'm not quite sure who you are.
Yes,
Rename
I've
yourself
asked
if you like.
Samson to identify themselves. We don't know who it is.
Samsung, can you tell us who you are, please?
Okay. I'm Dennis Townsend. I am a member of the Boulevard Baptist Church. Reverend Dick is my pastor.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Now, Dennis, we can see your name and we can see you, and we're absolutely delighted you've joined us. But we have somebody on the screen at the moment who's coming in through their Samsung SM-A145F phone.
Yes.
Do you know who this is? Can you introduce yourself?
I did send a message for that person, but I haven't had a response.
Okay, I'm sure it will be one of the other folks from Jamaica. Okay. So Devon, that was just amazing. So in taking those three elements, the church, enslavement, and Jamaica, you were so able to clarify certain dates and certain actions. And these are really important for us to understand. If we are to understand the time of emancipation, abolition and emancipation, and those years after. And I think it's for me, it's a time that I really know little of the history. In Britain, we jumped around and did a lot of celebration in 2007 for the bicentenary of the abolition of the transatlantic trade in Africans. I'm just going to say hello, Samsung. Hello, who are you? Tell us who you are. Do you want to just speak to us? Say who you are? If not, I'll just mute you again, okay? Right, so at that time, we at least learned about the abolition and to an extent, I learned a little bit about emancipation. This is the British population, okay? But there's a great deal more to learn. And your presentation really opened the door to that learning. And I think it's possible to understand far more clearly some of the dates and the timelines. So thank you very much indeed. Now we've got someone on the chat. Okay, it's Rosie. Were the plantations owners against the church schools? Rosie's asking.
Thank you very much, Liz. Dennis Townsend is a deacon of the Boulevard Baptist Church, and he's a former diplomat who served in England and deputy provincial secretary in Jamaica. Were the plantation owners against the church schools? The church schools.
Yeah, hi, Devon. Fascinating talk. Really enjoyed it. Yes, my understanding is that some of the earlier church missionaries who went out to the West Indies founded schools for the enslaved children. And I wondered if this is the case in Jamaica. In some of the islands, the plantation owners, of course, were against any form of education for the children.
Well, they would be because they wanted to get labor, right? And most of the church schools would have been, yeah. There might have been one or two who were not against the church schools, but some would have been.
Right, thank you. Walter, Vivian, can I just let Walter come in?
Are you to Walter?
Walter, where are you? You have to unmute yourself, Walter, if you want to speak.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much. Good morning, all.
Morning.
Morning.
Yes, I have a question, and I would like to know the church position on this. Is that it's always been a concern of mine that churches get certain, as the speaker opened up saying there should be a separation of church and state, and I agree with that. However, many churches apply to the government under the Charitable Act 501c, and they receive other benefits from the government. And so with the LBGQ and such organizations and whatnot, and I know the Bible speaks of homosexuality, but the government can come in and impose certain things against the biblical principles as to gay marriages and the like. So I would like to know the church position on that when they receive government funding and the government has a say-so as to how things they can say and not say against gays.
Right. First of all, I was trying to make the point earlier that the church is not homogeneous. So I'm not so sure. When you say the church receiving government funding, I'm not sure if you're talking about Jamaica, the church in Jamaica.
Well, I'm speaking mainly churches in Jamaica and the U.S.
Receiving government funding?
Yes.
Tell me a little more about that. I mean, there was a time in Jamaica when the government funded the Anglican Church, but that was disestablished from, I think, 1860, the 19th century. So where just help me, where is it that government is funding churches in Jamaica? There was a time they used to pay salaries, erect church buildings, and so forth.
Well, I know.
I don't think they have them. I don't think
I
in
won't.
Jamaica though they don't have that money either.
I won't call churches by name, but there are certain sectors I know, even in my religion, the conference receive government funding.
Okay, well, I'm not aware about that, but so that might be a particular denomination, but it's not in terms of the Jamaican Church collectively receiving funding.
No, I didn't say all churches collectively. I said some churches.
Okay,
not
Walter,
saying that-
well, I suggest, I'm interrupting here, and I suggest that that maybe you could contact through Vivian Crawford, you could contact Devon and ask to discuss this further. I just want the questions at the moment to be
Okay,
about
all
the
right.
presentation.
Okay, Liz.
Thanks very
Can I
much,
just
Walter.
mention
Thank
that
you. Right,
I
Vivian.
used to be at the Ministry of Finance, and I'm not aware of the government funding any church in Jamaica. I know what happened. The government provide tax breaks for churches, but they do not fund churches directly.
Thank you very much, Dennis. That was a helpful clarification. Thank you. Vivian.
Yes, thank you so much, and to thank Reverend Dr. Devon Dick. It's really an eye-opener. I don't do very, very well with these presentations because they still hurt, and I have to continue to pray for healing. But Rose's question linked something for me, because Reverend Devon said that the church came to Jamaica to support the planters. Wow. Because I now know, Rosie, that as I've said on this program, the parish of Trelawney, Cane Growing Space, there was no high school built for boys to have direct access until in the 1970s, because the unwritten education policy was at age 15, the boy should leave school and go and cut cane. Fortuitously, the high school, the first high school in the parish where boys could have direct access is William Knibb High School. The same gentleman Reverend Dick spoke about, who was taken in a boat from Trelawney to Montego Bay to be tried in the 1831, what should I call it? Uprising. I'm not calling it a rebellion. It is an uprising because it was a resentment. And I often wonder if we had more high schools for boys, direct access in Trelawney, would there be more Usain Bolts? Because that is the school that Usain Bolt went to. And also in that same Trelawney, the first school established for girls was by a Baptist minister who could not get his daughters because of their complexion to high schools in Kingston. That's Westwood High School. You should Google it, because that's the only school in Jamaica where the girls wear a hat. So this discussion, Liz, I can't find words to express my gratitude to you, because there's so much that I'm learning in terms of the mystery and the jigsaw puzzle. God bless you.
Thank you very much indeed, Vivian.
William,
I think
the
it is a
William Knibb,
jigsaw puzzle. We put the pieces together.
William Knibb High School in Trelawney that Dr. Crawford spoke about was founded by the Reverend Stephen James, who was the stepfather for one of my deacons. And Westwood, I think, was started by Reverend Mr. Webb.
Reverend Webb, yes. And sorry, at that same church in Stewart Town, where Westwood High School is, the Anglican church there, St. Thomas Anglican Church, there is what is called a fly door, where the people of my complexion had to stay in the back. They were cut off from the front of the church. It is now an abandoned church, but Rosie, when you visit Jamaica, the evidence is still there. And incidentally, the chapel at the University of the West Indies, the ruins of an old sugar warehouse from Trelawney, made possible by Princess Alice, Queen Victoria's last surviving granddaughter. And she was responsible for the construction of that chapel.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I think at this point, I'm going to thank you very much indeed, Devon, and just share the screen for a moment. I just prepared that slide with a little bit of background about yourself, so that people can see what the Boulevard Baptist Church looks like. I hope it's not too out of date, this photograph. I picked it off the web. So much respect to you. You've done so many things, and no doubt are carrying on the good work. But this story is exceptional, and your book, which Ian Randall's is the publisher, is certainly something that would inform people who are looking at this time in history. So for those of you who are into screenshots and things, you're very welcome to screenshot this page with a little more information just about the book. It says here that the book is well balanced. It doesn't seek to portray the church in a positive light only. And I think it's important to get that balance, because there's two sides to a lot of these stories that we're exploring. And there's some interesting as well references on the book. Because I've not been able to read it, I can't comment anymore, but certainly there's some good things there. So thank you very much indeed, Reverend Dr. Devon Dick, for coming along. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Vivian Crawford, for inviting Reverend Dr. Devon Dick along, and that was just brilliant. Is there anything else that you want to say, Devon? Are you happy to stay on a little bit longer just to hear a bit more about what we're talking about?
Thanks for having me, and thanks for those nice, kind comments. And I wish you all the best in your project. God bless you all.
Thank you so much. And please stay with us then. And welcome to all the rest of you who've joined us. It's really lovely to have you join us in Black History Conversations. You're welcome any Friday at this time. We've always got some interesting things to discuss. So now I'm going to explain that Rosie Caldicott, who's with us today, her colleague Richard Musgrove wrote to me on behalf of the Bristol Radical History Society to talk about her new book, Voyage of Despair. Now, Rosemary Caldicott joined us way before Christmas to talk about the research she was doing and the concerns that people in Brecon Town have got in South Wales, because in 2010 a plaque was put up by Brecon Town Council to honour Captain Phillips, and yet the story of the Hannibal is perhaps one of the most distressing stories of the many journeys that Africans made across the Atlantic Ocean. So Rosemary, would you like to just say a little bit, and then we're going to invite you to come back. You spoke with us before. We didn't record your presentation because we knew you were going to come back when the book was published, and people can though look, and I gave a bit of a summary of what you were doing there. So Rosemary, just over to you for a minute then.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Liz. Yes, the book is just a window really into one particular slave ship that, of course, is repeated thousands upon thousands of times. What makes the Hannibal slave ship of particular interest is that, as Liz pointed out, in 2010, Brecon Town Council erected a plaque in memorial to the life of Captain Thomas Phillips, failing to mention that over 300 people died on his slave ship, and the fact that he himself was a slave trader. So any tourist, any person walking past the plaque would have no idea who this man was. So I started researching in an attempt to expose this mistake made by the council. The book is based on 3 years of intensive research. It's based mainly on primary resources that I was able to gather at the British Library and also obviously at the archives in Kew. So that's how the book came about. The book is written in 6 sections. We've got a prelude to confronting the ever-present past. Now, this title reflects the fact that I'm writing a parallel story. I'm writing the modern day story of how monuments erected here in Britain, in our towns and cities, to slave traders are actually bringing the horrors of the past into our present day. So the book is a parallel story about, in this case, Brecon in the present day, and of course the fact that Captain Thomas Phillips came from Brecon. In part 2, I explore the lives of the mariners, of the sailors who worked on this particular slave ship, about their lives, about how they were coerced into working on slave ships because they knew that they would have less than 50% chance of surviving the voyage. And so I go into that in some detail. In fact, on Philip's ship, half of the crew did succumb to diseases. Some of them deserted, of course, and some of them, you know, had accidents on board. In part 3, I go into what I call money matters. So I go into the capitalistic nature of the founding of modern day global capitalism. So I look at how the Royal African Company of England, how it invested in the slave trade, how it made its profits, and how it was able then to eventually, this became the founding of the Bank of England and the modern day stock market. I also try to evaluate the profit and loss accounts of this particular voyage based on the records that have survived. In part 4, probably the most important part of the book, called The Africans, I explore the treatments that the people who were captured and enslaved on the Hannibal slave ship, to try and imagine, based on, of course, some historical accounts that were left behind in the later century, because we have very few records for the 17th century. This ship, by the way, sailed in 1693. But I talk about their capture. I talk about the conditions that they would have been held in at Cape Coast Castle, for example, for this voyage. I talk about, for the uninitiated, you know, I go into the torture and how these people were restrained on the ship based on the writings of Phillips himself, because he kept a journal which can be accessed on the internet. And in his journal, he writes about his captives, his enslaved Africans. He talks about them as if they are cattle. He talks about them being put in their kennels. So it's it's a very difficult read. It made me upset to write about it. And that's why I call the book Voyage of Despair. In part 5, I go into more general individualized examples, which I call the horrors of the Middle Passage. There are some examples from Phillips's slave ship, the Hannibal, which I go into in some detail. And I also go on then to talk about the enslaved arrival in Barbados and how, of course, you know, the ones that had survived. By the way, there were originally 700 enslaved people on this ship. So I talk about the 320 survivors, what would have happened to them once they arrived in Barbados. In part 6, I talk about Homeward Bound, the final passage, because this is, of course, this is a representation of the triangular trade. So I talk about what happened to the actual physical ship and Phillips himself on the passage back to England. The book itself is about 250 pages long, and I finish up in the conclusion of coming back to the present day and talking about Brecon Town Council, who I did have some email exchanges with, and I put their replies in the book. I quote their replies, and you know, and I end up with general discussion about, you know, shouldn't we be memorializing those that perished in this heinous trade rather than those who made capital and huge amounts of money, of course, with the not only the trading in human beings, but also with the slave trade compensation that that the slave owners received. I probably leave the book, you know, with people asking themselves, hopefully, more questions than I covered in the book. But you know, I attempt to unravel the profits made from this one particular voyage as an example of the expansion of global capitalism that favored Europe and the Americas, and how this moved us into the present day, and how the history of the enslaved for many people in Europe, sadly, is still yet to be told. And I hope that through writing this book, I've exposed a lot of the modern day problems.
Rosie, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. I'm just going to share the screen for a moment before we discuss a little further. I was remiss today, I didn't include in our PowerPoint presentation, that we have reminders. And one of the things that we say is that when subject material presented is emotive and at times quite confrontational, as this book is, then Garrick Prayog is happy to talk through any issues offline. And Garrick's actually put his contact details in the chat. So thank you for that, Garrick. So Rosie, yes, it's you told us before about the story. Now you've told us about the structure of how you've put the story to put the book together, and to me it sounds fascinating, and I'm very honoured to be asked to review the book. Recently we had our colleagues, I was saying earlier, Maxine Berg and Pat Hudson have spoken to us about slavery, capitalism and the Industrial Revolution. And their book, which was written during the COVID times, starts with the fact that Colston's statue was tipped into the dock. I can't get my words right. And I am fascinated by people who are writing at this current time with our perspectives at this current time, as so many people around the world are struggling to understand Black history, or as my colleague Yasser Savara would say, to overstand Black history. And I think this book sounds as if it's another way that people can understand the realities which were very much glossed over, as I said, in 2007 with the abolition farrago that went on, and to just tell the truth and tell it from original source material, which I'm sure was quite difficult to read. I mean, even if it's in transcription, it would still be quite difficult to read, to understand what Captain Phillips was saying, and his attitude towards the African people that he was dealing with. So I think this sounds absolutely fascinating, and there is a great movement in the UK. I'm back in the UK sometimes, to try to understand our horrible history. And sometimes there's pushback. But there's also, I think, great progress. And the fact that you're publishing this book, to me, is real progress. And I respect all my colleagues like yourself and Reverend Dr. Devon Dick for going to the time and trouble to really research and put the perspectives forward as clearly as they can. And it's only by us working together from different parts of the world that we're looking at just what went on in those difficult times and the impact and implications for today. So I'm very respectful for that. Robert, you'd like to come in?
Yes, I'm sure the irony wasn't lost on Rosie that Hannibal was a Black man. Could I just ask about the reaction in Brecon? I mean, did anybody try to defend Phillips? And did the whole thing become politicized? Or did they just say, whoops, we made a mistake, let's take the plaque down?
Thank you for that question, Robert. It's a really good question. Originally, I raised awareness about the plaque in the town that the local taxpayers had paid for, unbeknown that they'd paid for it, by writing a letter to the Brecon Press, which was published. And this opened up a huge conversation in the town, to the extent, and at this time we were just going into lockdown, by the way. So to give them their credit, the town council held an online meeting via Zoom, which over 70 people attended. Now, first of all, most of the people who attended were horrified that the plaque had been erected, and also the representation of Phillips within the plaque. I mean, one comment was, well, surely we could have erected a plaque in the town to somebody who actually did some good for the town. But there were some people who resented this exposure. One lady said to me, well, you're not even from Brecon, so why is it any business of yours? So there's that mentality as well. The council originally, in their defense, before the online meeting, did hold a meeting before lockdown, which was not open to the public, but the paper did do a long article about what was said in the meeting. Obviously the press were allowed in there, and it was extraordinary. I mean, one councillor said that, well, Phillips's ancestors go back to the King of Wales, so he has every right to have a plaque. And another councillor, who was a former Black mayor of Brecon, he said that, well, you know, we wouldn't have it would be like having a plaque to Rudolf Hoss, you know, in Auschwitz, you know. So the council actually voted by 10-4 to have the plaque removed and then placed in Brecon Museum and put into context. So there we have 4 councillors who did not want the plaque removed. What happened was that the weekend that Colston's statue was chucked in the harbour in Bristol, the same weekend, this is following, of course, the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, the same weekend, a plaque was ripped off the wall and chucked in the River Usk. Now, the plaque was retrieved and the council had promised, and it still hasn't happened, by the way, but they promised that it will go into Brecon Museum and put into context. When, going back to the original question, when the Black Lives Matter protests occurred, the Labour, the members of the Labour Party in that region of Wales, they took the knee, over 100 people took the knee for 1 hour in Brecon Town Centre, and they made the most beautiful placards, one of which I have illustrated in my book about Black Lives Matter. After the protest, which was during lockdown, they tied many of the placards as a public outdoor art display along the railings, along the river that runs through the town of Brecon. So they erected the placards for the public to be able to walk socially distanced past the placards and look at their artwork. That night, a man ripped them all down and burnt them on a bonfire. And he was caught on CCTV. Now, that is an example of how some people still react to any notion that Black Lives Matter, that that equality, you know, is enshrined in our laws. Some people apparently are still unhappy about this. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. And that pushback, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, there are significant examples, and this is certainly one of them. And your good wording about how the statue was chucked in the river, that was what I was looking for. Vivian, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Oh, thank you again, Rosie. Thank you. I noticed on the plaque, as a former elementary school teacher, that Barbados is not spelled the way it is spelled in Barbados. It's B-I-D-O-S, you know, instead of E-S.
Yes.
And the does there means that the verb is telling you that something is going on. But, you know, youth has caught up with me, because there was a time, Rosie, when I felt that plaques of that nature should be buried in the deep blue sea. And I now realize, and I said with youth, that I would be destroying the evidence. So let it be put in the public space that generations yet unborn will know what happened, instead of going through a museum and just meet upon it. Because I understand that enslavement was not taught in most British schools. Lord Gifford said at Winchester, he was not taught that. As an adult visiting Africa, he heard what happened, and he gave up his lordship, British House of Lords, and came to Jamaica to help us with that. He's a member now of the Reparation Council here. So let the records be there. Do not destroy the evidence. Thank you.
Thanks. And Lindy says the response in Brecon is fascinating and deserves a book in itself. Well, I think we've maybe in your book got that. So thank you so much, Rosie. I don't know if there are any other comments.
Liz?
Yes, Devon?
I wonder, I'm not sure if I'm understanding, but when you have certain artifacts, monuments, it is usually a sign that we are saying that this is the best of us, you know, worthy of reverence, deference, and imitation. So perhaps some things might need to be destroyed and a better example to inspire those who are young like Dr. Crawford to see.
I'm sure we can arrange for a statue of you, Dr. Vivian Crawford, to be erected somewhere. But
You're
joking
quite in
apart,
order.
which is a bit wicked of me, there have been real efforts, and I'm sure Robert and others would be able to tell you much better than me, where statues have been taken down, removed, portraits removed from public buildings, and replaced by more appropriate illustrations. So we can go into that again some more for you, Devon, if you want. Welcome to Eureka from the Custos of Clarendon's office. It's good to have you with us. Okay, so thank you so much, Rosie. Can't wait to get the PDF and read the book, before everybody else. But I'm sure it's going to be very hard to read, very hard indeed. But we will invite you back as soon as the book's published, and you can talk to us in more detail, and I hope you're feeling a lot better soon. Thank you ever so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me along today, and I'm so pleased I came along today because I really enjoyed Devon's talk. It was very interesting.
Excellent.
I've just actually returned from Antigua, but I've yet to visit Jamaica, so perhaps next year I might come and visit you all in Jamaica.
I think it would be very, very valuable for you.
I don't believe Rosie. Rosie, you haven't visited?
No, I've been to the Caribbean a lot, but I've never been to Jamaica.
And so you haven't had our parties? Our parties.
Oh, well, they do have them in Antigua.
They have them in Antigua. No, but the Jamaican one, no. You will have to return.
Right, before you make our mouths water with the thought of juicy patties or any other kind of patties, then we'll see. Can I thank all of the guests we've had today from Jamaica very much indeed. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting Reverend Dr. Devon Dick in his presentation. I'm sure you found it very interesting as well. Now, I was going to, and time's really against us a little bit, and Garrick, I'll let you come in, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about something which is an area of Black history that we've never looked at in any detail before, and that's about the invasion of New Zealand. So the Maori recognition. So I'll just take probably 5 or 10 minutes to go through some slides about that, and then you can do further research if you want to. And Walter's saying, right, okay, he's got a response here. Just before you say, Garrick, Walter says, oops, where is he? No, you go first, Garrick, and then I'll read it later.
Yeah, just introduction to a book I took from the library today. I haven't read it as yet, but interesting title. The Battle Against Slavery, the Untold Story of How a Group of Yorkshire Radical began the war to end slave trade, by Paul Dawson. That's the author, Paul Dawson. So I just got it today, and I will be, reading this with great interest. So that's a publication.
And reviewing it and getting it back to us. Thank you.
And the second one, again, this is based on true story, The Black Joke. The true story of one British ship that Battle Against Slave Trade by A.E. Rooks, R-O-O-K-S. True story, fascinating. So I will be reviewing this as well.
Thank you very much indeed. And just to say that we are going to, we are working on, drum roll, working on the new website for Black History Conversations. And we want to have a way that we can include many of these books that we want to share with other people, with reviews and comments and access for further information. Also with the author's preferences as to where the books are purchased. Now, in the case of books which are in Jamaica, we'd have to, for example, with Rev Dr Devon Dick's book, we'd have to negotiate with Ian Randall. I'm not sure how his books are made available in the UK, but we can work on it. You know, it's a small world now, and we can find different ways.
Liz?
Devon, is your book available as an ebook?
No, but I
No.
think you can get it via Amazon.
Yeah.
And there's a fourth book that came out last year, Preaching
Yeah.
in Jamaican Seasons.
Or maybe we can hear about that again, perhaps.
Yeah.
It would be
If you
really
could allow,
interesting.
yeah, fine. But if you could allow me to just mention, there's this book, Island in the Sun, by Monica Carley. She's the daughter of a British missionary, Reverend Mr. Tucker, talking about growing up in Jamaica in 1948
All right.
to 1954. Persons might be interested in it. She's naturally living in England. Island in the Sun, Growing Up in Jamaica, by Monica Carley.
Monica?
C-A-R-L-Y.
Right. Thank
She's
you
the
very
daughter
much.
of a British missionary. Okay.
Thank you. Well, we won't go through all the different other books that we've reviewed, but thank you so much to you both. As I just promised now, I'm just going to tell you that on the 2nd of February, it's Waitangi Day in New Zealand, or Aotearoa, as it's known. The illustration here is of the Maoris and the war canoes, which is all part and parcel of the ceremony. But there is real concern at the moment because the new government of New Zealand is accused of using fear to roll back decades of progress for Maoris and to reinforce colonial ideologies. Now, this accusation was raised at a huge meeting, which was held by the Maori people with their Maori king on the 20th of January. Now, subsequently, we've had the 2nd of February and Waitangi Day, which is the day that recognises about the treaty. So, first of all, just to say about this huge meeting, it's rare that the meetings, these national meetings, don't happen often, and maybe they usually attract 3,000 attenders, but 10,000 were there. Such is the concern about how this new government in New Zealand is looking at changing laws which have been empowering Maori people to have their rights and to be able to use their language. So that's just to inform you about that. And then Waitangi Day. Waitangi is a place in the North Island where the treaty was signed 180 years ago between the British, who decided that they'd quite like to live in New Zealand as well, and the Maori people who'd previously decided they'd quite like to live in New Zealand. So it appears as if, unlike in Jamaica, that there were the Tainos and earlier people living in Jamaica, it appears that there weren't in Australia. in New Zealand. Now you have to just bear that in mind. It's due to the fact that New Zealand is so far away from anywhere else. It's unlikely that humanity was living there before the Pacific Islanders found New Zealand and moved themselves in and became the Maori people. So when the Maori people operated in quite a different way to the Aboriginal people. The Aboriginal people all in Australia lived in their own different country areas, and they traded and they operated together like you would in the European countries or anywhere else in the world. But in New Zealand, the Maoris are one people, and they have one language that they all understand. They have variations and other languages, but they have one language they all understand. So the Maori chiefs met with the British people who thought it was a good idea to move into New Zealand to sign a treaty. Now, no treaty was ever signed in Australia, and at the moment the Victorian government, that's the state I live in, is working with the first Australian people, the Aboriginal people, to write a treaty now, like, 2024, whereas the New Zealand Maoris were suggesting to the British that they needed to sort out a treaty if they were both going to live on the islands of New Zealand. Now, this says again about the issues with the government. Now, there's a big walk where about 1,000 people arrived in Waitangi on the day of the recognition of the treaty. But the interesting thing about the treaty was that there were two versions of the treaty. There was one in English and there was one in Maori, but they weren't accurate translations, and they actually said different things. So the Maori chiefs were being duped by the British. I have to use the word surprise, surprise there. And there's a lot more investigation going into this story. As you can tell, 180 years ago, the actual documentation's a bit flaky looking these days. So in the English version, the Maori cede sovereignty to the Crown. So that fits in with the usual, okay, you can see in an illustration there that the Union Jack is much in evidence. But in the Maori text, they give governance to the Crown, and sovereignty and governance is different. So the vast majority of the Maori chiefs only signed the Maori version, and I'm not sure what literacy levels were like in Maori at the time. And certainly there's all kinds of issues and debates about that. But the University of Waikato has got a department there where they're studying and looking into all these issues and elements and recognising Maori as a language. And for those of you who are in Wales, where in Wales there's a separate language, Welsh, which is not like English in any way at all. There's been links between the Welsh language speakers and the Maori language speakers, because both their languages have been affected by the influence of the power brokers, the English. So yeah, so lots of interesting things around and about at the moment about the Maori people. So that's just to get you informed and up to date, because Waitangi Day was last week. Okay, Garrick.
The point you just raised about treaties, there are many, many treaties that was written that mean nothing at all. We used to say, Vivian, we said they fool the people, right? Them fool the people for nothing. and it have no consequence at all, just empty paper.
Well, I think it's quite interesting, and certainly it's an area to look into, both in Australia and New Zealand. There are efforts to share honestly the history of the times of the British invasion, which is what it's called now in Australia by a lot of people, and I think it's things are now. There was a TV series, I think it was on your TV in the UK, called The Australian Wars, and it describes that. Now, I don't know what materials and information there is in New Zealand, but I think it's worthwhile exploring and sharing. So thank you very much indeed to all of you for bearing with me to share that story, because living here in Australia, in the land that belonged to other people, it's not where I belong, but I'm living here. And that's why I pay respect to the elders of the First Nations, whose country this is, land that was never ceded and still causes a great deal of concern to the people who this continent belongs to, as well as the people in New Zealand. But very different stories. Okay, anybody else then for anything else before we finish the recording? And Jackie, lovely to hear from you. Jackie Pennant in the Southern States. I always forget where you are, Jackie.
Hi, Liz. Hi, everyone. I was just going to say that on the cruise I was on, I did go to Waitangi, to the treaty grounds, and we were able to meet with some Maori, leaders, and the thing, what I was impressed with what they did feel a deeper connection to the land and because of the treaty for them, they felt was a very positive thing. I don't know. I mean, I guess their version of the treaty, and I'm just wondering if the referendum in Australia has any effect on what's going on in New Zealand right now, with the change in sentiments.
Yeah, thank you ever so much, Jackie. I've actually been to years and years ago, went to the Waitangi Treaty Ground, and I was very impressed by the Maoris who do all the tour guides there and explain the story really very well indeed, which was good. Now in Australia, we recently had this referendum, which was about the voice to an Aboriginal voice to the Parliament in Australia, which would have moved things on ahead, but tragically, the vote by the Australian people was no. There are various reasons why that happened, but I don't know whether it's made a difference, because we have a government in Australia at the moment, a Labour government, who are very positive and very, very supportive of anything that will acknowledge the distress and the issues that the first Australian people faced. Just this week, we've had yet more apologies for other actions that were taken. So in Australia, we have a very positive government. In New Zealand, they had a very positive government, and with Jacinda Ardern, who would have, I think, when you went on the cruise, she would have been in power, her side. It's when the government changed sides that they are now. So I think it's more to do with the change of government than it is to do with the outcome of the referendum in Australia. But the two nations work very closely together, and obviously what can happen in one could happen in another. Jackie, are you going to come back to me on that? Jackie, back?
I'm here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was just thinking that maybe the referendum had a bearing on it, but I went on some of the tours, and I was really impressed with the connection you know, that the Maori have to the land, because, you know, unlike, you know, what happened in North America and in Australia, they were proud that they have this treaty. They were proud that they had this document that gave them certain rights. So the fact that it's being you know, they're trying to you know, take that away from them, it's I'm sure that's really concerning, because they are an example of a people who have been, even though they were, you know, colonized, they have been they've retained some of their connection to their culture and to their land.
I would say they've maintained a lot, and the whole language issue is very interesting. Robert's put a comment to say that Welsh is now compulsory in all schools. All official publications must be Welsh language first, and the exhibition that the Neuren have put on recently, everything has to be translated, and in Wales there's been in my lifetime there's been a very positive effort to accept the Welsh in Wales, to accept the Welsh language as an equal language with English, and there's legislation that means now you can see that's in place. Now, what was happening in New Zealand was very different, and even a step forward to that, Robert, because in everyday conversation, in what people would be speaking in English, there are certain Maori words that are used in everyday conversation by ordinary, everyday white people in New Zealand. So that's very interesting, and it's often written into, say, I don't know, signs in exhibitions, which would be in translation, but in the English translation, the Maori words are still used. Very, very interesting indeed. And I was hoping, I'm not sure it's going to happen now, but I was hoping to do a project to bring some Maori people and Welsh people together to explore the achievements and also the challenges that both languages have had in being recognised. So thank you for that comment there, Robert. Now, Walter, your comment goes back to the issues about compensations and all sorts, so I'm not quite sure. I don't think we'll follow that up now, if that's all right. Yeah, and yeah, I'm just looking back through the chat. Okay, I think we've covered loads today. It's been a very, very long session. For all of those of you who've stuck it out with us, I thank you very much indeed. We will be posting this online, so you can tell your friends about it. One thing I haven't asked you all to do, and maybe Vivian, you would guide me on this, rather than ask colleagues from Jamaica to give me their email addresses if they want to join again, maybe we can do it in some way through Reverend Dr. Our wonderful Reverend Dr. Devon Dick, who's just speaking with us. I'm not quite sure what to do, Vivian. If any of you want to put your email address, if you want to join another Black History Conversations, you're very welcome to put it here, or you can look at our website, which I'll just try and find for you. It's www.blackhistoryconversations.com is our current website, and I'm just going to show it to you so you know exactly what you're looking for. So if you go to our website, which is called Black History Conversations, okay, blackhistoryconversations.com is our current one. On the first page, you will find a poster saying what we're doing the next week. And then above that, you'll see where you can click to join the Zoom meeting, and you can just click on that on the website and you come through to the meeting, and we'll welcome you again. So you can see I put these different ones on. but we are developing a new site at the moment. So that's www.blackhistoryconversations.com. And it's really valuable to have input from different parts of the world. So thank you, Jackie Pennant, for joining us in the States. That's brilliant. Thank you for those of you who are joining us from North Wales. Rosie, I'm not quite sure where you're based in England.
Bristol.
Bristol.
I'm in
Okay.
Bristol.
Yeah, we need to do a lot more at understanding about Bristol's role in the slave trade. We had a speaker from Liverpool. We've never had anybody from Bristol, so that's going to be on our list. We've got Garrick, who lives over the water in the Wirral, and June Elizabeth Whitesmith Gully, who lives in Northampton in England. And the rest of you, thank you so much for joining us wherever you've joined us from. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, yes, it's a great session. Thanks, Jackie Pennant. Excellent. Okay, then.
Thanks, Susie. See you soon. Yeah, cheers. Yeah, bye.
Yeah, lovely, lovely. Great. Okay, bye.